How you doing? It's Jim from Mavstar Observatory. We're going to have a look at this a bit later on in the video. We're also going to talk about the old-fashioned method, the way we used to check the atmospheric oxygen with a graduated test tube with a tiny little hole in there. I don't know if you can see. At the bottom by the 10 there is a little drill hole in the bronchiolic glass. And as you can see, it's also graduated. So what we do with this, might as well just talk about this, means we've got it out here. We put a little bit of wire wool. This is something you can do at home. A little bit of wire wool at the end of the tube. Get another conical glass or a jam jar or something. Just put a bit of water in it up to the level of 10 mils on there. If you haven't got a graduated test tube like this, you can use any tube if you just want to get an idea of how much oxygen is actually in the atmosphere. What you do is put a little bit of wire wool in the end of the tube, and then obviously it's soaked in a bit of household vinegar, and that's so you can get the oxidation started, and then just pop it in the water. And what will happen is it will create a vacuum as the oxygen is consumed in the reaction with the wire wool during the oxidation process or the rusting that's taking place. And in a couple of hours you'll have it rise up the tube a little bit, and it'll give you an indication roughly of how much oxygen's in the atmosphere. So just very quickly I want to say big thanks to those people that have been supporting us over the last few days. I've also noted some familiar names, so first of all, thanks for supporting, and also thanks for staying with us. We're trying to answer questions here for you guys, because we live in a time where people are not forthcoming with information, and from what we've seen with these organisations now, people are just trying to hold on to the jobs, and they're being forced by politicians and people that pay their salaries basically to produce what they're being told to produce. And a classic example is what we see with regards to CO2 being perpetrated as the cause of global warming. I'm not going to show you graphs or anything. We'll just take it easy today. It's Sunday. Main thing is I just wanted to show you the finished oxygen sensor. If I just switch it on, we'll just let that boot up. And well, we had trouble with it this week. We got it all finished and we was putting it into this box, and trust me, there isn't much room in this box for anything else. We've got 4 of these tubes that run to the manual air pump just there. All it is a primer, a pump that you get probably on a chainsaw or something, just to put the fuel in the carb, but it also draws the air through the sensor. And as you can see, it's really only the bottom line that we're interested in, giving us the percentage of oxygen in the atmosphere, and at the moment it's 21.13, if you can just see that on the bottom. And we left the pipes extruding from the box, and the reason for that is maybe at a later date. It's always a good idea to think a little bit forward when you're building things like this. It's maybe at a later date we can connect another pipe to this, and we can probe certain things like environments, like if we want to check the environment of a jar or a reaction, we can also see what the environmental oxygen is in that jar or something, or whatever experiment we're doing. But the reason for the primer pump is, if you remember, the sensor that we was using had an exhaust and an inlet, and the purpose of that is so you can saturate it very quickly in the environment with the air by just pumping the air through the sensor. So yeah, we had some trouble. We burned out one of the PCB boards, or the Arduinos, and that was because when we was cramming all this stuff into there, there's a battery, there's a sensor, there's the little chip that converts the data into 5 volts so that the processor can understand the data, because our sensor that we used froze out data in 3 volts, so we needed to increase the voltage of the data so that the Arduino or the breakout board could pick it up. But I was going to build a CO2 sensor in a very similar manner. In fact, the CO2 sensor from SST, which provide the sensors for the oxygen, or the Luminox sensor that we've got in here. It's very much the same, again with the exhaust and inlet. I was going to build it, but we're really pushing for time. We want to get those pieces of equipment out to Brazil and South Australia during January, and to do that I can't be building other things, because we've got a few things that we've got to get finished. This was just something I thought we could quickly put together, but I have spent most of the week programming this, and obviously now we've got it, it doesn't really matter. But with the CO2 sensor, I've just went out and purchased one for us, and we can use the oxygen sensor and the CO2 sensor. Perhaps in a few field trips we can take them out into the forest, and we can just get an idea of how much oxygen is being put out by the trees during the winter time, and then we can go back into that forest during summertime, when all the leaves are on the trees and they're photosynthesizing. We can see how much oxygen is being put out there. We can also check how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere at winter and also in the summer, as well as I want to put it into a car with a few people in there, just check on how much CO2 we all exhale in the car, and see what levels that is. Then we'll take it onto a graded commuter train, and we'll see how much levels are on the train, and maybe in the new year we'll probably put it on in a fuselage of an airplane as well, just to I know these things are already regulated in aircraft, and that it's quite a particular way in which oxygen gets fed into the aircraft. When you're sitting there, you probably don't know it, and I won't sidetrack too much off it, but basically the compressor in the engine pumps dry air through the wing to keep it de-iced whilst it's in flight, and then as it's going through the wing, it's cooling down, and then it gets fed into the cabin, but it is drier. The humidity in the cabin is something that's not controlled, other than the amount of people that are breathing air, and as a result there's a little bit of moisture that comes out of our lungs, and it makes the humidity a little bit more bearable on a plane. Can you believe it that the aircraft industry relies on ourselves to increase the humidity in the aircraft? It's quite strange, isn't it, when you think about it? But there you go. One of the things I wanted to talk about, because I know it's important to a lot of you guys, you're now contemplating the idea probably of growing your own food, and some of the implications which you might want to think about is your latitude of where you are on the planet, because if you're further north, you're going to get winters, which are going to slow your crop productions down during those periods of time. And there is a lot of us that live in the northern hemisphere. And, as a result of that, what we've got to think of is how we're going to produce food all year round, not just in the summer. Or if you're just mainly thinking about producing your food in your summer, then you've got to do it in a manner which you can keep it till the winter. So you're probably going to want to look at preservatives and things like that. I did watch and followed for a period of time a guy called The Real Martian, and I believe he was at one point being trained to be an astronaut, but he didn't I don't think he managed to get into a position where he could actually go up into space. But he's a very intelligent guy, and he invested a lot of money on what he called AB1, and it didn't work out because there was a lot of energy that was required during the winter times, and he lives in an environment where they get good seasons of snow. So one of the failures for him was not pre-thinking about this. He is in the process of building AB2, but what his ultimate goal is to try and get something like a container size grow room that can produce enough food for a small family. To date, he hasn't managed to do it, and on the scales of what he was working on, I mean, his grow room was massive, and he failed. Now he's gone back into thermodynamics, and it's all virtual reality. He's building it, and there's a lot of maths going into it, so we can get the energy from day one. With AB2, hopefully being a little more successful than what it was for the AB1, but he's invested a lot of money in this, many thousands of dollars, and to date he hasn't managed to do it. We're going to be faced at some point where we've got to make some decisions. If we're going to start growing food ourselves, then we are definitely going to, and if it catches on and the majority of people do it, we're going to put farmers out of business even more quicker than what they're going out of business right now. So that's one thing we need to think about. And of course, when we put large growers out of business because we're producing these things ourselves, is that we will lose ultimately the variety of which we've got. And it's quite nice at the moment to go into a supermarket and get oranges and different varieties of oranges, different varieties of apples, and fruit across the range, food across the range. It's nice to get the variety, and you can pick and choose. If you're growing your own, you're just not going to have the available size of plot to grow that range of food on there. So these are things that we've got to start thinking about. We can grow food, certain types and amounts that we can sustain ourselves with, hopefully, because I've always been in the impression that you need around about 1 acre for a small family, and you need to, be in that acre pretty much every day, keeping it in a healthy condition where, you're controlling the pests, and you're making sure that, you're preparing plots that need to be sown for the next few months, and so on and so forth. So it's not, what I'm saying is, it's not something that any of us can just jump straight into and get going. I know that, in this country we have little allotments where you can rent a little bit of land on an allotment site, and you can grow your own food and veg there, but I've never known anyone grow enough fruit and veg for themselves and not have to go to the shops. This is the thing. So, and then also growing fruit and veg is just one thing, but also what about your meats and, your sources of protein? What do you do then? Are you going to extend it to maybe having pigs in your back garden or a cow? And, it's not easy when you start to really look into it. And the big thing is, what really is the big problem, what the real Martian, who's got his YouTube channel, you can go over to his site and have a look at that, is overcoming those periods of times when temperatures drop. And, if the farmers are struggling right now to get the crops out, and they're the expert growers in these ranges that they grow, then, you've got to be sensible about this and think, how successful are we going to be in the same environment as them? Really, if we look at our civilizations, they've always migrated to places where it was sustainable to grow these crops. And as a result, for periods of time, cities grew out of these little settlements. And, what we see is when climate has changed again, is these cities have become desolate. And cities are dependent on, it doesn't matter which age you go back to, they will all be dependent on things being brought into them to sustain the city. We live, most of us do, in cities today, and they really are not sustainable places. They're stagnant, highly dependent on exporting or importing food into them and energy. And, for that reason, if there is a problem like a grid down, or we get a solar flare, or something comes up with a magnetic reversal that we never expected, and we do start to lose civilization as a result of that, and all these things loom, as you know, we're going to be confronted with them. And I've tried to think of where I would put myself in that situation. I just think it's a case of using and living with less across the range. Less energy. A lot of people go into this renewables like solar power and wind power, and they expect to just flick the switch from having it supplied to the homes to, you know, using what they can produce themselves. And the reality is, with most people I've found that have gone down this road, is they end up having to use less energy as a result, because they just don't produce. I mean, solar panels are great if the sun's shining, but on the night time, if you haven't stored the power in batteries, they're a waste of time. And wind generators, again, if the wind drops, you know, it could be a couple of days before you get your internet back on, because there's no power going into either your battery storage or whatever. So, and this is going to be the case with the food you grow as well. If you're planning on going off the grid with, or trying to reduce your expenditure on food, because food is going to go up, and if more people grow their own food, food prices are going to go up as a result of that. We are going to eventually put farmers out of business as a result of that as well. And, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to all end up having less than what we've got now. It seems that we've peaked at this point in technology and, you know, the things that we've been accustomed to just taking for granted. And all this is going to change, especially when we look at what we're going to be faced with in the next decade. You know, the next 10 years are going to throw some things at us, for sure. And one of them is what we're already seeing now, is the changing climate. You know, we've got jet streams breaking down. As a result of that, we're getting droughts in some parts of this world again that have had droughts before, but not for a long period of time. And we're getting floods come back in these regions where hundreds of years ago it was common. So there's been a big change of our terraform and the climate on this planet. And like I've said before many times, we haven't reached the equilibrium yet of the worsening of these problems. I still think we're declining. We certainly can see that with you know, sunspot productions. You know, heliosphere shrinking as a result of that. Our magnetosphere shrinking, and in turn we have an increase in cosmic radiation, which isn't good. And this is going to increase and get worse and worse. And we haven't even factored in yet what, you know, we think about ourselves a lot, but we don't give any thought to all the biodiversity around us, because cosmic radiation affects all biodiversity and across all the ranges. So, you know, we have to really sit down and start thinking about all these things if we're going to come to a conclusion, or, you know, find a solution of how we are going to move forward. And this is, I think, what we should have regularly, you know, talks about these things, because it's okay to keep pointing out the issues. You know, we're approaching possibly a time where we could slip easily back into a glacial period. You know, the climate is deteriorating on this planet, and, you know, it is already starting to affect food production globally. So I think what we need to do is start thinking about solutions and, you know, remedies to some of the problems that we're going to find. And for the meantime, I think the most important ones would be food production and energy production. These seem to be the things that are on the increase, and these are the things that are taking people out of the game right now, because their food is going up every week, it seems. I can certainly, you know, see this happening in the UK. I mean, over the last year, it's not that I'm eating more food, it's just that, you know, the prices of the food has gone up. So there's not more food going in the trolley at the end of the day. It's just that what's going in the trolley is doubled in price, and you're probably seeing this yourself. So, you know, we need to come to a solution to, you know, resolve the food problem, and we also need to start looking at how we're going to power our homes in the future. You know, and if we can become more self-sustained individually, then we don't have to depend on these failing governments globally. So, you know, just a bit of food for thought there, guys, that I thought I'd share with you. I'll just briefly, I won't mention it too much, guys, because I know some people just don't like the idea that this is a publicly funded observatory. But, you know, November, December and January are the worst months for us raising money on the channel. So, if you want to help out there is a link in the description, and, that'll be great. We've got some expenditure coming up. We nearly ran into a massive problem this week with buying the photo, the SIPMs that we use for the oh my god, muon detectors. Because the company that I brought them off last time have now said that they will only sell them in quantities of 3,000. I hope that they are going to now allow it, because they did send an invoice out for the 2 that I'm going to purchase, but I'm hoping that we're not going to have trouble with this, because there's no way we can buy 3,000 of these things at, even, you buy obviously larger quantities, the price comes down, but, we just haven't got a couple of £100,000 to spend on photo multipliers or SIPMs. So, we're just hoping, fingers crossed, that they will distribute them for us, and we get them. We will get them, because the mail, the delivery is quite good with this company. So I'm just hoping that they will send out, a few at a time as we need them. So yeah, there is a cost, obviously, of what we're trying to put together. We're putting a magnetometer, a muon detector, and a Geiger counter out to Brazil and South Australia, so that we can get a reading on high and low levels of cosmic radiation, and we can check the weakened region of the Earth, which is the South Atlantic anomaly, and we can also check one of the highest intensities right in the centre of the intensity down in South Australia. So, there's work going on, and obviously, they do take a bit of time to build these muon detectors, because there's 60 odd components that have got to be soldered onto the board, which are all surface mount. You have to use tweezers and look through a microscope while you're soldering them on. So, there's a bit of work there. But yeah, there's a link down there, guys, if you want to help out and just get us through these, next few months. It would be great. And, I'll just wish you the best for Sunday. And, hopefully I've left you with a bit of food for thought. These are the things we're going to have to start addressing at some point. So I'll say what I usually do in here. Have a great day, and I'll catch up with you again in the week. As always, bye for now.